Mae Murphy, the sister of World War II's most decorated hero, Audie Murphy, who lost his life in a plane crash in 1971. However, that isn't the secret. Audie Murphy kept something from everyone for 26 years. His family slept in the house, while he lived in his own garage. Every night he kept a loaded revolver beneath his pillow. No one knew that he had lost $3 million in gaming. The government looked into him. His widow filed a $10 million lawsuit. How he died isn't the actual question. The man who killed 241 enemy soldiers was afraid to sleep in his own bed because of this. Born on June 20, 1925 in Kingston, Texas, he came from a family that was struggling to make ends meet. Out of 12 children, Audie Murphy was the seventh. More than his ability to provide, his father was notorious for his disappearances. He appeared one day and vanished the next. Audie was forced to take on the role of man of the home at the age of 12 as a result. In the 5th grade, he dropped out of school and began picking cotton for $1 a day. That comes to roughly $23 adjusted for today. A household full of siblings had to be fed with that meager sum of money. There was no one else to do it, but it was a child's life. The blow that would permanently alter him then arrived. Audie's mother, Josie, passed away from heart illness and pneumonia in 1941, when he was only 16. She was just 50. His youngest 3 siblings were then removed and sent to an orphanage. Audie was left all alone. That loss never came back to him. That void remained with him. As he once remarked, "She took something of me with her. I've been searching for it ever since." And by taking risks he started to fill it in the only manner he knew how. Before the army ever gave him a weapon, he had already mastered survival. He learned to shoot from hunger. Every shot had to be significant because there weren't many bullets. His siblings didn't eat if he didn't. He used a borrowed gun and a slingshot to shoot squirrels and bunnies. Audie never missed, according to a neighbor. His aim was so precise that it was the only thing he had control over in his life. He would go on to become one of the most lethal troops of World War II thanks to that same ability. He killed at least 240 enemy soldiers by the end of the conflict. However, no one wanted him when he first tried to enlist. He was too thin and too little. He weighed only 112 pounds and was only 5'5". No, the Marines answered. No, the Navy answered. He wasn't even wanted in combat by the Army. They attempted to enroll him in a cooking school. Audie, however, had no intention of frying eggs while others fought. In order to appear older, his sister assisted him in falsifying a birth certificate. The Army eventually conceded. He enlisted on June 30, 1942. He was just 17. He had something to aim at, and a way to let out the sorrow he had been holding inside for years because of the conflict. In July 1943, he killed his first people in Sicily. 2 Italian officers attempted to flee while mounted. Audie made 2 clean shots and dropped both. He was 18. He contracted malaria the same week, yet he persisted in his struggle. Throughout the conflict, the illness returned repeatedly. He consistently refused to spend a lot of time in the hospital. Every time, he went back to the front. He stepped into hell in early 1944 at Audie. The head of the beach became a slaughterhouse. Thousands of people perished. You felt like a fugitive from the law of averages there. According to Audie, you were aware that your number will arrive shortly. He scuttled through enemy fire on March 2nd, approached a German tank and used rifle grenades to destroy it alone. He received a Bronze Star for that deed, but it demonstrated something more profound than medals. He was no longer scared. However, nothing had a greater impact on him than the passing of Laddie Tipton, his best friend. In France, they were engaged in combat next to a vineyard. 2 Germans pretended to surrender while waving a white flag. Tipton took a step forward. In an instant they shot him to death. Inside Audie, something broke. By himself he stormed the German position, captured their machine gun, killed 6, wounded 2 and took the others. He continued shooting until nobody moved. That was more than retaliation. He subsequently stated, "I do not stop firing while there is a quiver of life left in them." It was a combination of anger, grief, and survival. Audie changed as the conflict continued. He sharpened while others wore down. He no longer feared bullets. According to officers, he was the best at determining danger. He was feared by the soldiers surrounding him, but they also revered him. He rarely got mail and didn't talk much. He was more than a soldier now. Something else, something colder, had taken his place. He declined the army's offer to become an officer. He was reluctant to abandon his men, because he didn't want to make his worn-out unit perform drills. He even turned down a promotion. Malaria returned. He was admitted to the hospital multiple times. He continued to combat first in Sicily, then in Naples, and again in March 1944. He and 60 other members of Company B were awarded the Combat Infantryman insignia on May 8, 1944. For those who had endured the worst of it, it was an honor. However, no insignia could make up for what the war had stolen from Audie. On January 26, 1945, a 19-year-old soldier named Audie Murphy stood between his countrymen and death, close to the tiny French village of Holtz. Company B, his battalion, was all but destroyed. Of the 120 guys, 102 had been lost just the day before. There were only 18 remaining. They now had to contend with 250 opposing men and 6 German tanks. The earth was frozen. They were unable to dig ditches. There was no real hope, no backup, and nowhere to hide. Murphy, though, would not back down. Then followed what ought to have been the end of it all. Near Murphy's position, the M10 tank destroyer was struck by a German round. It burst into flames. The crew left it. The fire was spreading quickly. Murphy got on top of it, but any rational person would have fled. With flames beneath his feet, he seized the tank's 50mm machine gun and began firing. He continued. 3 sides were used by the Germans to fire. Murphy remained motionless despite the barrage of bullets. Shrapnel struck his leg. He continued to shoot. He operated the machine gun with one hand while calling in artillery strikes with a field radio in the other. He fought alone for an entire hour and 60 minutes, controlling bombs, eliminating enemy soldiers, and observing them approach as close as 10 yards before firing. Private Anthony Abramsky, one of his guys, looked on incredulously. When the smoke cleared, Murphy had killed or wounded about 50 German soldiers, saying, "I expected to see the whole damn tank destroyer blow up under him any minute, but it never did." Almost alone, he repelled an entire opposing attack. Once their infantry support was destroyed, the tanks were forced to withdraw. His own men were in disbelief. They saw something else, but they believed they had just seen him die. Something not human-looking. Murphy was drenched in blood, tired, and injured. However, he joined his comrades as they advanced to complete the battle, from the front, not the back. Later, Abramsky described it as the most courageous and gutsy thing he had ever witnessed. Audie Murphy accomplished something that no other person in American history had accomplished by the time he reached 21. 33 U.S. military medals have been awarded to him. Not in a lifetime. All of the Combat Valor Awards that were available at the time were only given during World War II. He possessed them all. 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars, the Medal of Honor, and the Distinguished Service Cross. The Legion of Merit was even his. Not to mention the foreign medals from Belgium and France, or the campaign ribbons with several combat stars. He was referred to by the French as a Legion of Honor, Chevalier. He received 2 Quadar medals from them. He did not display these, but Belgium gave him the Quadargar 1940 Palm. He gave out a lot. The replacements are currently on display at a Dallas museum. Next is 241, the number that followed him about forever. The U.S. Army claimed Murphy killed that many enemy soldiers. Some estimates are significantly higher, up to 250, according to others, including those slain by the artillery he summoned. Murphy, however, was unwilling to discuss it. Another reporter asked him what it was like to have killed that many people, and he just said, "I don't know how they know. I didn't keep count. I don't want to know." Another reporter questioned him how they arrived at the figure. He never boasted about it, but he responded, "It didn't feel either way." Feeling wasn't a luxury in the infantry. It weighed on him, if anything. On July 16, 1945, his visage appeared on the cover of Life magazine, changing everything. He once remarked, "The only thing I've ever found I was any good at was war, which is a terrible thing." He became famous right away, after taking that picture of a young freckled 21-year-old Texan. James Cagney saw more than just a combat hero when he saw Audie Murphy on the cover of Life magazine, in July 1945. He saw possibilities. Cagney was moved by the picture which identified Murphy as the most decorated soldier. He offered Murphy a fresh start in the film industry, took him to Hollywood, and signed him to his production firm. But everything came apart in an instant. The Cagney brothers never handed Murphy a part, even after the contract was signed. Their agreement ended in 1947 due to a falling out. Murphy resided at Terry Hunt's athletic club, and was now stuck in Hollywood. His sense of belonging was lacking. He once claimed that the movie business felt plastic, unreal, and unlike the combat. Finally, things began to move in 1948. For just $500, or around $7,000 in today's currency, he was able to secure a minor role in Texas, Brooklyn, and Heaven. Although it wasn't a glamorous role, it was the start. Murphy made appearances in almost 40 movies and one television show during the ensuing 20 years. But he was silently unhappy behind the screen. He never thought he was capable. He was completely honest when he told a San Antonio reporter just before he passed away. "I had one hang-up as an actor. I had no talent. I informed the directors that they were aware that I had produced the same film 20 times. It wasn't good, but it was simple." Like a dagger, his comments sliced through the Hollywood glitz. Murphy had no desire to become famous. He was making it through. Then came Hell and Back, the movie that would permanently change his life. It was based on his own autobiography, and was released in 1955. Murphy, however, was unwilling to play himself. He believed that the public would believe he was using his military record to his advantage. For the lead, he even recommended Tony Curtis. However, no one else could adequately describe it. He almost broke during the procedure. Jesse Hibbs, the director, saw a sharp contrast. Murphy obeyed commands in westerns, but in this movie he became fixated on every little detail. He gave the painters instructions on how to paint craters. Thus they appeared recently bombarded. He examined the uniforms of each soldier. Having witnessed explosions in real life, he gave the special effects team advice on how they should appear. Nevertheless, he detested the way Hollywood swept it all away. He recalled the rain-soaked Battle of Anzio. It was sunshine on screen. Although the Khmer pocket had been fought in mud and snow, it appeared too simple and clean in the movie, and that discrepancy tormented him. The public adored it. The highest-grossing movie at Universal Studios was To Hell and Back. Prior to the release of Jaws in 1975, it had that title for 20 years. There was only one man's war, and no romance or glitzy love tale, and it still brought in millions. However, Murphy broke down when the box office took off. The horrors he believed he had left behind in Europe started to return. Later, historian Max Hastings described Murphy as an immense psychological wreck. He found no peace in reliving his struggles for a film audience. It simply made his wounds worse. He became a legend as a result of the film, but it also forced him to live a false life. It was not his version, it was Hollywood's, and his story doesn't stop there. Murphy was working on the music behind the scenes. He co-wrote 18 country songs with songwriter Scott Turner between 1962 and 1970. Written at Murphy's Ranch in 1962, Shutters and Boards was their biggest success. It recounted the tale of abandonment and heartache. The song made me feel something. Nearly 60 vocalists recorded it in various languages, well-known names as well: Porter Wagner, Jimmy Dean, and Dean Martin. A pause was followed by another tune. When Murphy heard the wind roaring outside his California home, he reportedly remarked, "When the wind blows in Chicago." Dean Martin and Eddie Arnold later recorded the song. He was born with a flair for rhythm and rhyme. One of his wartime poems, which he attributed to a fictional soldier named Carrion, was included in his book. Audie Murphy was a movie star, a combat hero, and a representation of American bravery. However, most people were unaware of the heartbreak, addiction, and mental turmoil that characterized his life behind the cameras and medals. He wed up-and-coming actress Wanda Ricks in 1949. She was 21 years old, optimistic, and had been seduced by a picture of Murphy on a magazine cover. However, her spouse wasn't merely a hero. He was a broken person. Murphy wasn't safe at home. Flashbacks were violent for him. He had trouble falling asleep. Sometimes when he was absorbed in wartime recollections, he would hold Wanda at gunpoint. The ideal couple was portrayed by the media. She was referred to as his little Hendrix honey by headlines. However, the truth was horrifying. He requested that she relocate to Texas and quit Hollywood. But even a typical day was tough because of his mood swings and paranoia. The man who took his place was a stranger, and she once remarked, "When I turned to kiss him, he was gone." She fled for her life only 7 months after they were married. Citing mental abuse, she filed for divorce in April 1950. A year later it was finalized. Murphy remarried later that year, this time to Pamela Archer, an airline steward and former Army medic. She appeared to be someone who could relate to him. Terry was born in 1952, while Skipper was born in 1954. It appeared improved for a time. However, another type of storm was brewing. Pamela had a religious obsession. She made their house a place of judgment and terror by enforcing rigid moral standards. Following the birth of their second son, she issued a harsh command to Murphy: "Maintain your marriage yet lead a different life." Emotionally detached but legally bound. He was now a stranger in his own home, but he was still expected to be a father and pay the expenses. He made an effort to keep his sons safe. He wished to protect them from Pamela's radical ideologies. But he had suffered too much in the war. He experienced erratic mood swings, nightmares, and insomnia. Every night he kept a revolver beneath his pillow. He was always afraid. He aspired to be a good father, but genuine connection was impossible due to his emotional coldness. He referred to them as his joy in interviews with the public. He once remarked, "I think I'd still be completely happy living as a hermit if I didn't have Pam and the boys." However, those warm moments were short-lived. Every time his trauma returned. Murphy had finally had enough by the late 1960s. He had considered divorcing Pamela, but he decided against it. For his sons, not for her. He was afraid that if he left, something would happen to them. Thus he remained in the garage rather than the house. He converted it into a home and lived there covertly. The family was viewed as whole by the outer world. But Murphy was banished within that house. He said, "People didn't know I was living in the garage in 1971. Although he made an effort to remain near his children, he was merely a ghost to them." He was talking to divorce lawyers just before he passed away. However, time was running short. Not alone did Murphy's internal conflicts destroy his family life. They also ruined his finances. He lost everything as a result of his gambling addiction. He lost over $20 million today, with an expected loss of $3 million. It wasn't informal. At a time he would wager 5 or 6 figures. Perhaps attempting to replicate the adrenaline of battle, he followed that sensation. In order to avoid misleading youthful admirers, he declined to endorse cigarettes or alcohol. Behind closed doors, however, he was losing everything to an uncontrollable addiction. He had more than just mental PTSD. He became dangerously dependent on sleeping drugs as a result of it. Placidol, a sedative, was what he used to stop the nightmares. It was only 2 years after the war ended that he began taking medications. In order to kick the habit, he spent a week alone himself in a hotel room in the middle of the 1960s. He wanted to be free of it, so he put up with it all, sweating, trembling, and possibly even having hallucinations. In the process, he almost perished. He was desperate to take charge of his life, though. The fear persisted, though. A loaded .45 caliber pistol was always beneath his pillow as he slept.
The legendary Western movie star Gary Cooper gave it to her as a present. Murphy, however, did not consider it a memento. It served as a shield. It had once been directed at his first wife's face as she woke up. He continued the practice even in hotel rooms. No location ever felt secure. The conflict had never finished in his mind. Audie Murphy's film career had collapsed by 1968. He was one of Hollywood's biggest stars only a few years ago. He used to get $100,000 for each movie. However, he was suddenly receiving offers as low as $20,000. Producers cut their bids after realizing how needy he was. They were indifferent. He was the most decorated war hero in American history. All they saw was a dying star. Murphy also declined to accept easy money. He declined the large deals that the cigarette and liquor industry offered him. His words were, "I couldn't do that to the kids." Money was secondary to his values. In 1961, his television program Whispering Smith had already failed. The phone ceased ringing around the late 1960s. A hotel basement served as the workspace for his production company. A Time for Dying, his final film, had so many financial issues that it wasn't even released in the United States until 1982, 11 years after his passing. Murphy claimed that it was similar to being a slightly over-the-hill prostitute. He was witnessing the death of his honor. The situation worsened. In an attempt to stay alive, Murphy began to pursue dangerous business ventures. He put almost all of his $260,000 into an oil business in Algeria in 1967. The entire investment was lost overnight as the six-day conflict broke out. He was devastated. By 1971, he was looking for any chance to get out of debt. He even sold Bob Hope his cherished ranch. However, the funds were short-lived. He begged for discounts that could save him over the phone incessantly throughout the day. To be near his sons, he was living in a garage apart from his wife. The former Nazi combatant was now battling debt, creditors, and complete collapse. Not only that, but the government also came after him. An investigation into delinquent taxes was started by the IRS. Murphy was forced to acknowledge his debt when he declared bankruptcy in 1968. It was embarrassing. He was now being chased for money by the same government that had pinned 28 medals to his breast. "It was worse than dying on a battlefield," he remarked. This was the last straw, and there was no reprieve after the oil loss, the faltering film career, and the unsuccessful investments. Murphy's gambling losses throughout the years were eventually estimated by a friend to be around $3 million. Everything added up. He was out of time, drowning, and desperate. But he persisted. He flew to Virginia on business on a twin-engine Aero Commander 680 Super on May 28, 1971. In an attempt to close a new transaction, he was traveling with 5 colleagues. The aircraft took off from Atlanta's Dalba Peachtree Airport. Less than 2 hours was the estimated time. They proceeded despite the poor sky conditions. There was no flight plan submitted. Trouble arrived quickly, even though no one anticipated it. With 8,000 flight hours, Herman Lavelle Butler, the pilot, appeared to be an excellent fit. There was a catch though. He was only aboard that kind of plane for 6 hours. He wasn't instrument rated, which was even worse. This implied that he was not permitted to fly through fog, rain, or clouds. He had no idea how. And they flew into just that. The weather became lethal, dense fog. The mountains are hugged by clouds. Only 3 miles are visible. There was no sign of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Butler attempted to fly by sight under circumstances that need extensive instrument training. He was without it. Nevertheless, he persisted. He even attempted to land on a roadway close to Virginia at one point. The aircraft was observed avoiding trees while circling at a height of just 150 feet. Then it veered directly toward the mountains to the west. The plane crashed into Brush Mountain, which is 2,700 feet high, at 12:08 p.m. It was a violent crash. Everyone on board was instantaneously slain. Murphy's body was flung from the wreckage uphill. The scene of the crash was incinerated. Finding it took 3 days. Search planes were hindered by bad weather, and nobody knew where to seek because no flight plan had been filed. The search involved 31 aircraft. It was 4 kilometers up rough mountain terrain when the wreckage was discovered. A year later, the National Transportation Safety Board released its conclusions. The reason was that when the weather required instrument guidance, Butler continued to fly under visual rules. In that plane, he lacked both experience and talent. The fact that Butler had already crashed a jet the previous year didn't help either. He ran out of fuel in March 1970 and both engines failed. That time too he had attempted and failed to land on a roadway. Despite the fact that it should have raised a serious red flag, he continued to fly. The conspiracy ideas blew out after the crash. Sabotage, according to some. Others thought Murphy was slain by the government to keep him quiet. He had been vocal about his own victimization and the rights of veterans. However, none of the hypotheses were supported. Pilot error was demonstrated by the evidence. A poor choice, an avoidable catastrophe. Murphy's relatives weren't passive. Pamela, his widow, sued 13 parties for $10 million. The pilot's estate, Colorado Aviation, and others. A jury gave the family $2.5 million in damages after 4 arduous years. That would come to about $14.6 million today. Colorado Aviation was found negligent by the court. They had permitted an untrained pilot to operate a high-tech aircraft under risky circumstances. All conspiracy suspicions were put to rest by the lawsuit. Foul play would have been revealed throughout the trial if it had occurred. But it wasn't simply loss and failure. Murphy was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery on June 7, 1971. He requested the standard white marker that all soldiers receive without any special treatment or gilded headstone. That's precisely what he got. Every year, thousands of people visit his cemetery. Because so many people visited, cemetery officials had to construct a path around the tree that shades his grave. His honors, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 silver stars, and 3 Purple Hearts, are listed on his headstone. The family declined the cemetery's offer to embellish it with gold leaf to honor his prominence. That is not what he would have desired.